So while we only have a very small sample size to work with, it can be said that FaZe seems to be taking a turn for the better in some of their most recent results. And just watching them play, just kind of from an eye test, just seeing how they're approaching the game, you can just see improvements. And obviously the main catalyst, the main driving force for this would be the acquisition of Karrigan as the new in-game leader of the team, something this team has never really had this entire year, and even probably dating back before that. Yes, they've had a coach to probably help them tactically and Robin, but they've never really had a true in-game leader, someone who really had experience doing it, right? And so this seems to be a formula that has created them some success, even though, like I said, the sample size is quite small. And so I've used this cheesy line, phasing up, to kind of tie to the idea of trending up because of the whole phase up thing that FaZe fans do. So you'll just have to deal with that. But if you take a look at their most recent results, you can see some good finishes. So obviously at IEM Oakland, they were able to make it out of the group stage, and they did so not dropping a single map. They actually won their group until they went straight to the semifinals, and these were some pretty big map wins. I mean, they just crushed Heroic on Train, which Heroic is, I mean, no joke of a team in my opinion. They have some talent, particularly with Valda and this new guy, Nikolai Amadi, usually quite solid. They pretty well led. Train is not like a terrible map for them. I would say it's like in the middle of their map pool, and they just got crushed on it 16-3, and then they wrecked NIP 16-5 on Overpass. So big map win there. They also beat SK on Nuke, which SK has had their troubles with Nuke, so that's fair enough. They beat Mouse on Train. Once again, a pretty one-sided game, despite the fact that Mouse's offline record on Train is not too shabby. It's not great, but it's not like really bad or anything like that. And then they actually beat Cloud9 on Mirage, which fair enough, this historically has been one of FaZe's best maps, but it's also a map that Cloud9 has had a lot of success with lately through some of the better finishes that they've had here at this portion of the year that we're in. Now, once they went up against NIP in the playoffs in the semifinals, they played a pretty good series here. I mean, they went toe-to-toe with NIP on Nuke, took them to overtime. And remember, NIP is one of the best Nuke teams in the world, very balanced on both sides of the map, and they took them into OT. They really pushed NIP to the limits on Nuke, and so this was a really good showing despite a loss. And then they crushed NIP on Train, which again, I don't think NIP are any slouches on Train, usually pretty decent on it. So to see them just wreck NIP on Train was pretty crazy. And then we have a very close Overpass game, 13-16 loss to NIP on Overpass. And remember, NIP are the eventual champions of the tournament, beating SK in the finals. And we see FaZe really going toe-to-toe with the eventual champions of the tournament, including a map like Nuke, which NIP are so well known for. And so this was just, it looked really impressive just to watch them play, and then the end result is a good one. And at iBuyPower Masters, which is like a smaller tournament, which is a qualification for Oakland, they obviously didn't have any trouble really there. They lost to Immortals in overtime on Cash, but they wind up, not having too much trouble with TSM and Renegades to actually go on and move on to play in IEM Oakland. So I won't talk too much about that tournament. Then prior to that, of course, they did go out in groups at EPL Season 4, but this is one of Karrigan's first really big tournaments with the team. And to be fair, they still had some decent results in that group. They beat Nagatos on Mirage. They did struggle with Energy, but they did beat them. But yes, they did have some big losses to SK and NIP, no doubt about that. But of course, that was when they were playing with Jacob instead of Kiyoshima, because remember, there was a situation where Jacob was originally playing with the team, and originally Karrigan came in to replace Kiyoshima, and then you saw Jacob actually take a step out, and Kiyo came in. And so far, with the current five that they have and what they'll be rolling with in the future, we've already nailed their only results so far offline, which is, of course, iBuyPower Masters, IEM Oakland. And then when it comes to online play, the only thing that this current five has done is actually play in ECS Season 2. Not all of the matches, of course. They had played some ECS matches already with their previous lineups, but they managed to qualify for the finals. They took third in the regular season. They dropped some maps here and there, sure, and it wasn't like they did spectacular in ECS with this current five, but it was enough to qualify for the LAN event, and so that's really all I can talk about for the current five. But yes, they played a couple of tournaments where Jacob was still in. And Karrigan had come in, and the big one was, of course, qualifying for playoffs for E-League Season 2, which is basically Karrigan's debut with the team while Jacob was still on it, where they beat out Immortals and Cloud9 in best of threes to actually come out of the group second. And so they are now currently awaiting to play Virtus Pro a day or two after I released this video in the opening playoff round of E-League. The big thing is that prior to Karrigan's acquisition by FaZe, we saw FaZe having a string of, group stage exits and just not really making deep runs in bigger tournaments is really what it was. I mean, they could definitely have the occasional map that looked really good. They could, occasionally upset a team even in a series, but they just weren't really making deep runs in playoffs, despite the fact they had a lot of firepower. And so you would think that with the amount of firepower they have, maybe they're capable. They just didn't really have anyone to steer the ship, so to speak. I think you saw Rain have to kind of take up the mantle of calling at times, despite the fact that he was like their most skilled player, probably still is their best player. And to burden him with that, is something he's not really enjoying or not really used to doing, or maybe doesn't really like to do, definitely seemed to take its toll at times on the team. And of course, when I say this, it was, at DreamHack Bucharest in September. They lost out to Dignitas, which is fair enough. Dignitas certainly has been on the come up themselves. But then they also lost out to Flipside Tactics in a best of 3 at SLI League back in September as well. And then when you look at like ESL1 Cologne in July, which fair enough, they lost in the group stage there to like teams like SK and Fnatic, who were certainly, Fnatic was still pretty solid then, and of course SK at the time, best team in the world. So fair enough, they lost in the group stage at that major. That was like a really stacked group, the group of death of that particular group. But even from like July dating all the way back to the beginning of the year, so a span of like 6 or 7 months, they were basically falling out of the groups of pretty much everything they played in for the most part. And even some struggles online, like they didn't qualify for Epicenter. They lost out the Godsent. They weren't able to qualify for ESO1 New York. Though they did pretty well in EPL Season 4 to, qualify for that LAN event. So I guess the online results were a bit mixed, but certainly lots of group stage exits in LAN tournaments. And so, like I said, the results are just better. Now they're actually making some of their first deep runs under the FaZe banner in some tournaments, and they have opportunities to do even more, right? Like I said, they do have a tough matchup against Virtus Pro coming up in the E-League playoffs, but if they can somehow manage to get past Virtus Pro, that means they're in the semifinals, and they've already beat a big opponent, and they're on a weaker side of the bracket, where I think the next team they would face would be the winner of Mouse Sports and Optic, which is certainly a manageable situation for FaZe. So if they somehow get past Virtus Pro, they very well could find themselves in the grand finals of E-League Season 2, which would be great, and they're also one of the teams that should have a pretty good shot to qualify for the major, which will be coming up pretty shortly after they play in the E-League playoffs. So there's a couple of tournaments coming up where they can really start building something for themselves, really start making an argument that they're one of the real top teams in the world. They probably already are, somewhere in the top 10. To be quite honest, even just with some of the current results. The problem is the sample size is so small with their current 5, it's really hard to know exactly where they're headed, but I think it's fair to say that they're somewhere on the top 10, or certainly approaching the top 10. So let's talk a little bit about what is making this team trend upward. Obviously, the thing I mentioned at the beginning of the video is that Karrigan coming in as the in-game leader seems to be the catalyst for it all. And I think that the obvious thing to say first is that they actually have a true in-game leader, and all the things that that's going to bring to a team. Someone who is going to be able to be the main driving force of the team, the guy that called the shots with no hesitation, the one to add some decisiveness to their play. One to just direct traffic, to read things mid-round, call adjustments, call an audible off of a default into an execute, or, prepare the team for their opponent, maybe some type of counter-stratting, or at least picking up on some tendencies and stuff and passing that along to the team. It's also about unlocking certain players on the roster, putting them in new positions and roles to get more out of them, and therefore make the team better overall, which I'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later. The particular case I want to talk about is Rain, which I've seen a huge role swap for Rain, which I think has made him even better, or at least even more impactful for FaZe. But again, I'll get to that in just a second. So just think about all of the basic things you think about for an in-game leader and what they can bring to the table, and Karrigan can do that. And I think that maybe some people have kind of discredited Karrigan as being a good in-game leader because of the struggles that Astralis had in his final months with that team. But let's not forget that he's the guy that kind of turned that team around back when they were still TSM and they were having their struggles. And he came in at the very beginning of 2015 at X Games Aspen, helped them have a pretty good run there. And with that team in the early months, like the first 6 months, first year, he won some titles with that team, and he had some good tournament placings with that team. So let's not forget that, just because on the back end of his career with Astralis, there was some struggles going on. You don't really know what happened, what really broke down. Maybe they didn't trust him as much for whatever reason, or maybe because things were going so poorly, they wanted to try new things, and they just weren't seeing eye to eye. I'm not really sure what happened there, right? But I'm just saying that you can't just say that because the back end of Karrigan's career with Astralis was poor means that he was becoming a poor in-game leader. Obviously not. He's on FaZe now. You can see the impact he's had to bring this team up. So just want to throw that out there at the very beginning, some kind of simpler stuff on the surface. But when you look at them actually tactically, what I would say is that they have a very similar identity to what FaZe had before, which I think what FaZe was known for before Karrigan and still is that they have loads of firepower. You know, they got guys like AZ and Rain who certainly have sick aim and can really have, you know, big plays and just, you know, like I said, a lot of firepower there. You have Alu, who can be quite a stable operator in my opinion. I think he's caught in some flack because of some moments where he hasn't looked as sharp, but I think overall it's inarguable that Alu's actually a pretty solid operator. So you have that aspect. Karrigan, for an in-game leader, can frag pretty good. I mean, I know he's had his struggles with FaZe at times where he hasn't put up numbers, and that's been the case at different moments. But for an in-game leader, he certainly can have games where he puts up pretty big numbers. He's one of the better fragging in-game leaders out there, probably. Even if it's not just numbers, just, you know, pure impact and his flexibility. And then you have someone like Kiyoshima, who in his own right can put up pretty good numbers and can be like a big, you know, opening force in certain situations. So they have a lineup that's loaded with firepower, and their identity was to just be very aggressive. Like on one of their best maps, for instance, Mirage, you would just see all these crazy like connector splits on the A-bomb site within like the first 20 or so seconds of the round. Very aggressive executes, and this was really map pool wide, to be honest. Like you could see this on almost all the maps they played. Just very aggressive, very basic stuff, a lot of 1-4 splits or just like really quick executes, very explosive play was kind of the identity of the team. I'm not going to break down all their old strats and all the maps, but that's just kind of like the most general conclusion I can come to about watching them play and what I thought about them. And I think that even now under Karrigan, you still see a good bit of this. Like when you watch them play a map like Cash, for instance, they still like to do like these explosive mid controls or these explosive side executes, but you can see that with Karrigan, it's just a little bit more crisp. It's a little bit more organized and structured. They can play a little bit of a slower default and actually work things out and let Karrigan kind of pick up on things. But you can see him pick up the pace and run these faster mid controls, like right at the beginning of the round, rather than letting to the mid or late round, or doing these faster executes right off the bat where there's just no hesitation, just an immediate rush. And I think that that's the big thing, is that the team is willing to listen to that. They're willing to get around him and go for it. They seem to just be on the same page. They seem to be very trusting of Karrigan. They seem to have really given him the reins to just lead this team freely. Whereas I kind of heard, you know, the last bit of time that Karrigan was with Astralis, maybe they weren't as accepting of the things that he wanted to do. And so I think that that's one of the big things here, is that they seem accepting and it seems to work, even though it's a similar identity. It's not like he revolutionized things, not like he recreated the wheel with FaZe. I think he just kind of tightened things up, and Cash is just one example of this. So another example is Mirage, where again I think that they have a pretty similar identity. You still see very aggressive like 1-4 splits with like one guy mid and 4 rushing A or 4 rushing like upper B apartments or what have you, or maybe you have like an extra, you know, person mid but still like 3 guys attacking the other side of the map. They still do run a lot of this, but they are capable of playing a slower default. Right? Seems like they don't just have to rush mid and just take fights openly at the beginning of the round to try to create space. They can take a more passive approach and like work the map a little bit in a more organized fashion. But again, the identity of these aggressive executes is still very much a part of their play. I think back to when they had that overtime win against Cloud9 on Mirage, which I think was at IEM Oakland, if I'm not mistaken. In the group stage is one of their first games there, where you still saw them just almost every round on T side just running these fast-paced executes. So again, identity's still there, but the executions had, like I said, a bit more organization, a bit better nade placement, a bit better timing. They just look sharper, like they just look more crisp. It's really hard. It's like very subtle things with the main identity being there, but it just looked optimal. It looked optimized. It just looked better. With the mixture of aggression as well as just being able to play some slower stuff at times. Like I said, still very fast-paced. And then when I watch their overpass play, it's very similar, like a good mixture of default, you know, play on the A side of the map where you're just like getting control of mid and bathrooms and you're working your way slowly up A and mid and setting up for some type of smoke attack on the A bomb site, but they throw in the fast-paced B executes as well. There's balanced play, and I think that's just map pool wide, is that there's a bit more balance there now. They aren't as reliant on aggression. You can see that it's still very much a part of the team, and there's some games where they run it quite often, but they have the option to play like the slower default and let things unfold and let Karrigan kind of read things and, you know, pick the right mid-round adjustment or kind of come off the flow chart based on what he's seeing to take the best path to around victory, so to speak. Now, what I'm about to say next really ties in with this. The other big thing that Karrigan has done is unlock Rain. This is one of the biggest observations I have made watching FaZe under Karrigan. And I'm going to use 3 maps as an example for this, just to talk a little bit about Rain. And so the first one's going to be Cache, where we used to see Rain actually lurking on the B side of the map. Wasn't really that much involved all the time with like getting control of middle or getting part of a big A execute. Seemed like he was, like I said, just more of a lurker, more used to like play late round situations or cut off rotations, or yeah, sure, on a B execute he might be involved in opening it up. But like I said, he just wasn't as much of a part of the main like control group, like the one that really fights for map control. Whereas now, in the latest Cache games I've seen, he kind of plays like mid or A, and Kiyoshima's now lurking the B bomb site. And so you do see Rain more involved in opening up mid control in the early parts of rounds or mid round, or being more involved in opening up the A bomb site on A side executes. And so it's just about getting Rain more active, more involved, using his aim to create space for his team. And I think that this has had a huge impact on the team. And I think that Rain has been very effective doing this. And I think Rain was already quite a good player who put up fantastic numbers, but now you see him doing that in kind of a different role, where I think it helps the team more. I think it has just more of an impact in a positive way. And so this is really cool to see. Now, a map like Mirage, he very much plays kind of the same positions outside the A-bomb site. But we know a lot of playmakers play outside the A-bomb site. I think of guys like Madi, or guys like Nico or Stewie2K from Cloud9. These different guys who play outside the A-bomb site on Mirage, which is kind of a peripheral role, but they're such big playmakers on that side of the map. You know, they can just take peeks through Palace or A-ramp and open things up. And usually you see a lot of splits on the A-bomb site anyway, so they're usually a part of the attacking force of an execute, no matter what. Whereas, though, I will say one thing I've noticed is that Rain would almost exclusively play that a lot of the time in some of the other Mirage games I saw before Karrigan. But now, if they're going to do a B execute, Rain will just lead that through upper B apartments, which is not something I feel like I saw a whole lot of in the past. Maybe a little bit, but I feel like it's a little bit more prevalent. Like I said, a little bit more prevalent that Rain's a part of the entry for us, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. And then Overpass is the other map I noticed it a lot, where again Rain used to lurk outside the B bomb site, very much like he did on Cache. Once again, Kiyoshima seems to be taking up that role, and now you do see Rain being a part of that group on the A side of the map, like pushing back bathrooms and pushing back long A, getting control of middle, setting themselves up for some type of A execute. Again, just more involved in map control, more involved in creating space, opening things up for his team. Again, very effective doing this. So I just feel like this has to have been a product of Karrigan's leadership to shift Rain into a new position, unlock him, allow him to have more of an impact for the team. I think this is great stuff. Now, a couple of things I will say that we have to keep an eye on FaZe is trying to see how they develop their map pool. Because right now we know that Cobblestone's basically a permaban in best-of-3 situations. And even in best-of-1s, it's usually their first ban out. But their other bans seem to kind of vary. Like I've seen them ban like Overpass or Nuke or Cache. It seems to depend on their opponent. Whereas they really do like to steer things towards Train quite a lot. Mirage seems to be a map they like to steer things as well. And when you look at the total of 2016, you think about some of the maps that FaZe have been most well known on. And of course, this dates back to their original lineup where they had Michael and Fox as a part of the team. And then when Kiyoshima came in, and all that good stuff. He's been in and out now, I guess you could say. And then obviously Alu comes in later, Karrigan now, Kiyoshima. So even just looking at the entirety of their play throughout this year offline, the maps that really seem to stick out as maps they've been pretty good on, Mirage probably being one of the best. Train seems to have been pretty good for them. And then I would say Dust 2 has been pretty good as well. And this is usually just related to their offline play. Online play, they've played Cache a lot, but very mixed results. Mirage and Train seem to line up pretty much like similarly to their LAN play. Their online play in those maps were good. I think their Overpass online play was pretty good. Their LAN play was kind of 50-50 throughout this entire year. The nuke is the other big thing, though, I think, is like they've actually been really, like, they only played it a few times online, but they've won all the times they've played it online this year. And then on LAN, they're 3-3 in total for the year. But again, so many lineups involved in this. Really hard to draw too much, but at least it gives you an idea of maps they like to play a lot, and maps we have seen them have some success on, particularly Mirage, Dust 2, and Train are like the three that I think of, and then you kind of see Nuke as a possibility this year for them. Now, when you think about just since Karrigan has been on the team, we've kind of seen this line up where Mirage still seems to be a map they like to play and can be good on. I think they're 2-1 offline since Karrigan joined. Only losses to Renegades in double overtime. But they did have that overtime win against Cloud9, and then the other was against TSM, which is not much you can draw too much from there. Their nuke play on LAN is 3-1. Again, they only lost to NIP in a very close overtime game. We talked about that earlier. They look very good against NIP, really close game there. So they look to challenge one of the best nuke teams in the world. And their wins on nuke have been against weaker nuke teams, to be fair. So hard to know exactly how good their nuke is, but the fact that they challenged NIP so well does at least make it look somewhat promising, and maybe something to keep an eye on that they can develop next to their Mirage. Their Train, they're 4-0 so far with Karrigan offline. They've beaten Renegades, Heroic, Mouse Sports, and NIP, which of course NIP is no slouch. I think Heroic are pretty decent. I think Mouse usually can be decent on Train. So I think these are some decent Train wins, like nothing that knocks you out of the park or anything like that, but at least you can see that they still have a strength on Train and a strength on Mirage, as they have, with other lineups throughout this year. So right now you look at it and you can say, okay, Cobble's a permanent ban, that's out. Of the 6 maps left, we can see that Mirage and Train still seem to be pretty good, and maybe Nuke is something to think about based on what we've seen thus far. Haven't seen them play Dust 2 offline yet since Karrigan joined the team, I don't think, so I could be wrong about that, but I don't recall a Dust 2 game they've played in any of the lands since he's been on the team. So can't really know. I would imagine they would still be able to play Dust 2 pretty well, but it's just not something I've seen them bring out yet. I'm not sure if because it got banned against them or if it just didn't happen that way, but yeah, still need to see their Dust 2. Their Cash, haven't seen enough offline play to know, though I know that overall this year it hasn't been as good. So that could be a map they could work on, is Cash. I think that they can solidify Nuke. That's the thing. I think you keep Mirage and Train strong, you solidify your nuke, maybe you work on Cash, and then Overpass, again, kind of hard to know, because both games I've seen them play offline Overpass were games against NIP, where they won one game against them very big fashion in group stages at Oakland, but then they lost really close in the playoffs at Oakland to NIP. So don't really know what their Overpass is going to be like as well. So I think that it's just too small of a sample size to know what their map pool will be. I think, like I said, you can at least count on Mirage and Train to still be up there, but it's going to be about whether they can solidify their nuke and whether or not they want to move in the direction of Cash Overpass or how they want to manage that. So that's something to just keep an eye on, how they develop their map pool. Outside of that, I also want to keep an eye on Kiyoshima, because he is playing a new role for this team as kind of a lurker, something that he hasn't really done for this team. I think he did it a little bit for Envious in the past, but my memory is pretty shit, to be honest. So I kind of want to keep my eye on this, because I haven't seen him do it so much yet, but I know at IEM Oakland, when they played against some of the bigger teams like NIP in the playoffs or against like SK in group stage, he kind of struggled a little bit. But on a map like Mirage, he's still kind of involved in opening things up, but maps like Cash, Overpass is where he's taking more peripherals, which Overpass seems to be a map they want to play a little bit. So I just want to kind of keep my eye on him in this role and see how it works out. Because I don't know if that's like the optimal role for him, whereas the opposite end of the swap is that Rain is more active, and that seems to be working really well, so maybe it's worth it. But I just want to kind of keep my eye on this. I don't necessarily think it's a problem area yet, but I just kind of want to see how this develops. This could be something to think about. I also want to keep my eye on Alu, because I know that he did have a tough time in the Oakland playoffs against NIP, and we did see a little bit of struggle from him at EPL Season 4 as well. But I don't think that this is too much of an issue, because like I said, I think overall he's usually a pretty stable opper, but just something to keep an eye on. So Matt Poole, Kiyoshima in a new role, and just kind of keep an eye on Alu's form. These are just like 3 potential problem areas to keep an eye on. But what I will say is that the strengths is that they've kept a similar identity, but they've optimized it. We've seen Karrigan unlock Rain, and then just all like the basics of being an in-game leader that Karrigan bring to the table, on just giving them more direction, giving them more structure, giving them like a real experienced shot caller. And then the recent results have been good. They are trending up. So it's definitely an exciting team to keep an eye on. The recent results have been pretty impressive, though the sample size is small, and I've definitely seen them make some changes in a positive way, particularly with Rain's role. It's time to keep an eye on what they can do. Like I said, they're up against Virtus Pro and E-League playoffs. If they can get past that, they're on the weaker end of the bracket where like they would play Mouse Sports or Optic next. They certainly could find themselves in the finals if they could in fact surpass Virtus Pro, which will be a tough task. And they're set up to qualify for the next major. I know there's a lot of top teams in the major qualifiers. It's almost like another major in itself, but we can see that they certainly would have a good shot to make it there, and then let's see what they do. So definitely a team to keep an eye on for the next few months. Definitely exciting to watch play. Really like some of the changes I've seen, and so I just want to talk a little bit about the potential rise of FaZe around the corner, on the horizon perhaps. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe for more. Thanks so much.